All right, so I don't know how to even start this off. So, lately there's been a lot of stuff about Zapco and the quality of their stuff, and there's been a couple of videos out there. So Sam from Barevids did a couple of videos on basically some inadequacies and some build quality problems with Zapco amps. And also Raw-CAt, he could put his 2 cents in on following up with stuff that Sam said about the amplifiers, and all were pretty justified. I mean, if these were my amps, I'd have a problem too. And I watch these guys' videos. Raw-CAt's awesome. Sam, I mean, I've learned a lot. For my doing amp repairs and stuff from these guys. So you guys are pretty legit. But I was questioning how does a company like Zapco sell a product like that, with the flaws and the problems and the issues and the whatever. So I hit up a buddy of mine because I don't own any Zapco amps. I've got, Linear Power, I've got Soundstream, I've got Alpine, I've got all kinds of stuff from back in the day. I don't even have any vintage Zapco stuff. I don't have any new Zapco stuff. So yeah, I appreciate you guys watching this video. So you take the time to like, you leave some comments, and please subscribe. And also, hey, listen, watch the end. This video gets pretty interesting, and I've got sort of a surprise ending for you. So keep watching. I hit up a buddy of mine, and I was like, "Hey, you got some Zapco amps? And hey, bring me one of those by. I want to check it out." So he brought it by, and this is what he brought me. This is their Z2 series, okay? So this is not the same AP line that was in the videos. And so I was kind of checking it out, and I thought, well, that's a decent looking amp. What I noticed was there isn't a lot of surface mount components on this thing. In fact, there's really no surface mount components. I mean, all these resistors and stuff are all through hole stuff, which I think is a lot more tedious and expensive to produce stuff that way. I looked at that and I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. And so, I was gonna play it, and I was like, this thing's brand new and all this stuff. And so I said, well, it's not really relevant because it's not the same amplifier. I mean, it's similar, but it's not the same. Okay. So, I said, hey, Derek, thanks for letting me borrow this thing. And, but, here's your amp back. And I said, I'd really like to get my hands on one of the AP ones. And just like that, one appeared. So, if you want to compare these things, they are not the same amp. Okay, they're very similar in layout, but they are not the same. Okay, I think this is like $1,000 amp. This is like a $1,500 amp. Okay, this thing's got really, really nice RCAs on it. These ones are just sort of standard, run-of-the-mill. So take a look inside these two. So these two, dimensionally, they are pretty damn close. In fact, I don't know, maybe the heat sink extrusions are the same. They do actually look like they might be the same profile and everything. 7.5 inches, 7.5 inches. So these are both really similar. You can see the layout. Hey, keep watching. I'm going to test this video just like Sam did to see if this amp has the same problems that his did. We got 4 caps on each inductor, or transformer, I should say. This one has inductor coils on it. We got some going into the output as well. You can just see that there's a lot more added to the circuitry on this one, but one thing that is missing from the AP are the crossovers. Okay, and I'm looking at this thing, and one of its features are the removable op amps. Okay, and that was one of the problems that they had with the amp was these sockets. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of rolling op amps. So people will swap them out and they tell you how amazing the sound changes with them. I would like to experiment that, and maybe I will one of these days. But some of these op amps are like $150 a piece. I think they're $75 to $150 a piece for these things, and we got four op amps here, so that's quite a bit of money. So that just tells you when you're doing these amps, building these amps, like componentry wise, like you got a capacitor and you go, well, a cheap one's like $3, and you go, well, a nice audio grade one's like $23, and you're like, oh, okay, well then you got how many in the in the amp. So anyways, when you look at this thing, we've got different grade components in this thing. I'm not sure what brand. Oh, these are cap tops and capacitors and stuff in there, and this one's just got a little bit lower of a grade of componentry in it. One of the things I did notice that there was no glue on these, and this is the later serial numbers. This is a 25 whatever series, so these are of the newer of the whatevers, and you can see when you look at this amp, what they were talking about that was swapped out. I believe, I don't see the transistors in here. Maybe it was these little guys right here, all these little transistors, right there. Those ones were all swapped out. Whereas you can see, these are all through hole. And this one's got a lot of surface mount components on it, which, to me seems like it's a lot easier. They've got these machines that just go stick these things in here. So anyways, I dissected this thing. I looked it over, I put it on the bench, and I played some music through it. And I mean, it sounds as good as anything that I own, for sure, So, you got to wonder, where's this coming from, right? All right, so I've got this thing on the scope, and I've got 15K sine wave going through it. Channel 1's fine. So I ran all the same tests that Barevids did, and I did notice that it did draw about 1.2 amps of idle current. I also checked the sine wave on this thing to see if it had any notching in it, to see if it truly was a Class B amplifier. And as you can see, there's no evidence of that. This is a Class AB amplifier. All right, well, now it's a couple weeks later, and I had some time to kind of ponder this, watch those videos, and talk to quite a few people about it. Like, is Zapco really ripping people off? I mean, are these just cheap Chinese amps in a fancy box with a fancy name? Like, who's buying these things, and what's the market for this level of amplifier? And so I looked into it, and there was quite a few different $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 amplifiers that are basically competition amps used in the same manner as these $1,500 Zapco amps. I was discussing this with a friend of mine who's way more connected than I am, and he said, well, why don't you call Chris over at Zapco? And I said, who's Chris over at Zapco? He goes, well, he's the the U.S. distributor. He's up in Washington. Give him a shout. He's a cool dude. So I said, all right. So I reached out to Chris, and sure enough, Chris was more than happy to discuss this with me. And I said, hey, how does this happen? And he says, man, I really don't know. He goes, I'm not sure who dropped the ball, what happened. And I said, at this level of amplifier, you would think that there'd be, a significant amount of quality control, more so than what you do with like budget amps and stuff like that. And I said, how would something like that get through? And he said, I don't know. And so he said, when we have any type of warranty problems or anything, they usually just sit here, and once a year we send them back to Italy, where the parent company's from. Apex Group is the owner of Zapco. And so I said, man, I wonder if that amp that they got was some sort of a refurb or some sort of a repaired unit or something like that. Because I just couldn't imagine the factory that builds these, doing something like that. At that point, you think you'd just scrap the thing or do whatever. So, at that level, right? So, I asked Chris, I said, I can't imagine that these are what float Zapco. And he said, no, really. We make these amps because it's good brand recognition. Zapco's been around for a long time. They've got a reputation for making high-end stuff. He said, we've got a broad range in our product line. And if you look at their product line, they've got like 4 or 5 tiers of stuff. And I said, okay, cool. And I said, well, kind of like the JL Audio thing. Like, so why is this amp still $1,400? The 4-channel one that I've got, the 6-channel one, I think is like $1,500 or $1,600 or whatever, $1,800. I don't know. And I said, it's like 20-year-old technology, 25-year-old technology. I said, I've got Arc Audio amp from 2004 that is, pretty similar to, some of this stuff. I said, so it's nothing new. Where's the new technology? I said, what makes me want to buy one of these amps? So not to sell this AP amp short, it does have some pretty cool stuff. There are film caps in this thing, and obviously really high quality components and the removable op amps. That is really a new trend thing. And he says, the market for these amps is really just competition vehicles, and most of these amps are going in competition vehicles. He said, we don't sponsor a lot of stuff. People are buying these, and they're using them primarily for competition. And he said the sales numbers on them really aren't very high, and one of the reasons why the technology on them doesn't move very fast is because the production numbers are so low. He said, like when you redesign an amp, just retooling the heat sink, could be tens of thousands of dollars just to do that. And if you've got an amp that sells, 30, 40, 50 units a year, like each model, like, you'll never get that back. And so, I don't think that that these AP amps are really something necessarily financially significant for Zapco. I think it's really just brand recognition and stuff. And so I said, well, that's cool and all, but what have you done for me lately? And I was like, you're just gonna keep selling these things until nobody wants them anymore, or what? And he's like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, these things are old. These things are pretty outdated. I'm like, people want something a little more compact, a little more efficient. There's been advancements in Class AB, and he said, oh, well, we have a reference line. And I said, oh. He goes, yeah. He goes, no, we have a reference line that's really just to replace the AP line. And I said, oh, okay. I said, yeah, we completely redesigned them. They're new and stuff. And so I got something to show you. So Chris sent me one. This is a loaner. I don't get to keep it, unfortunately. That would be pretty cool. But in fact, all these that wonderful Zapco amps, none of them are mine. So anyways, so this video has taken a complete twist. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to check out the reference series amp. So let's open this thing up. Check it out. All right, so I haven't even opened this thing up. I literally got it today. So check it out. Got some fancy packaging. Owner's manual. So these are the comparison to the two amps, and I'm going to tell you, I don't really think this thing's any more compact. The other one was, 7.5 inches. This one's a heavy 8 inches, and it's maybe you know, without the terminals and stuff, I mean, it's probably two inches shorter with counting the terminals and stuff like that. But you know, this thing's nice. It's along the same lines as the AP series. There are no crossovers in this thing. We just got a couple of gains, some really nice looking panel mounted RCAs. All right, let's open this thing up and see what's hiding behind this panel. I guess nothing's hiding behind the panel. Looks like we got, I'm gonna say those are like 8 gauge, where those ones were damn near 0 gauge. Maybe those are 4 on the power and ground. I think we've got 80 amps fuses in there. So let's open up this thing. Let's take a look inside. All right, so I've got both these amps open. This is the new reference series, and this is the older ZAP series, and you can tell that these are two different animals here. Okay, I mean, this is technology. You know, this amp came out and was released in 2012, and it looks like fairly traditional Class AB amplifiers. Oddly enough, this amp looks a lot much more similar, but the components on it are really tiny. You know, I don't know if I could ever work on something like this. I don't have the ability I mean, this is, you know, this is all laid out by a picking machine and wave soldered and whatever they do. So anyways, and to go ahead through to compare these two. So they're both 150 watts a channel at 4 ohms, okay? This animal here, I didn't realize that the Z series was a very robust amplifier. So these things were 275 at 2 ohms. This one's 230 at 2 ohms, okay? Apparently, this thing will run 1 ohm as long as you're running music on it. And it even said that you can run 2 ohms and 1 ohm bridged on this amplifier, as long as you run some fans on it, and as long as you can, you know, you're listening to music and not just tones, you know. So no SPL competitions with your Z series AP amp. Whereas this one's not quite as robust. Okay, so this amp is a 2026 model, and you know, they both use really high quality parts, right? So we've got, this thing's opened up for you here, and we've got, these are the output, these are the Sanken transistors, and these things are fairly robust. I don't remember what the specs were on them, but they were like 270 volt, 15 amp or something, I don't know, but they were fairly stout. So walk you through. So they've got covers on the transformers. I don't know if that just looks cool. I mean, this would be pretty neat to put a plexi back on it, but sometimes that just looks cheap. You know, apparently this is supposed to isolate noise. I don't know. I don't know if they're bigger or smaller transformers on there. So while this one has some really good parts in it, you know, it's got the upgradable op amps and stuff in it. This one does as well. And I was trying to see, I don't even know where the op amps are in this one because they're different style. So this one uses Texas Instruments op amps, which are very, very, very common, and they're very high quality, and they are upgradable, right? So there's WEMA caps on the output. I believe they're poly caps. I don't really see. So I think, are these the poly caps? I don't know. Anyways, I mean, some of these components on here I'm not really all that familiar with. And apparently all the connections on this thing are like really nice gold plated. And so that does make a difference. So, you know, 1.1% resistors on this thing. I mean, that's just, I mean, most of the good resistors you buy are 1%, you know, so these things are, you know, 10 times that. So when we get to the reference amp, this one's rated at 110 dB signal to noise ratio. This one's only 102, okay? And, you know, I'm going to say that those numbers are kind of BS. And you know, people are going to say, well, no, those are the numbers that you use. But, you know, Fosse Audio, I did a video on this amp, and so did everybody else. And you know, Raw-CAt, you know, said, oh, it's super clean and its numbers are great. And yeah, okay, the numbers are great. This thing sounded like dog shit. I'm sorry. You know what? This is great if you're looking for a compact amp. I mean, this thing puts out, you know, nearly the same power as this one, and it's a fraction of the size. But if you're looking for a good sound, this is not where you're going, right? If you're the dude that's in the market and you're trying to decide if you want this amp or this amp, seriously, that doesn't happen. It does not happen. So anyway, so the numbers, you know, aren't everything, and I believe that there's got to be some other test. Hey, it's your ears. Use your ears to test your amps. So, this thing's got the upgradable op amps. Apparently, they use Muse 8820s, and they're upgradable to the Muse 02s. And so, one of the interesting things that they did was apparently Zapco made their own caps. They spec'd them to Samson, and Samson built caps for them for their own specifications. And, you know, they've got film and metal poly caps that are really good stuff. I mean, this stuff really makes a big difference. And apparently they're lifetime, you know. I think we've still got standard electrolytical caps on the power supply. But I believe so. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure those look like electrolytic. So, you know, this thing's got killer parts in it. You can tell that amplifier design, even from the class A/B standpoint, has significantly changed. Just like these chip amplifiers are changing class D, which are making you know, horrible sounding amps even worse. You know, this is the new layout. This is the new design. You know, the trend is to use these poly caps and these fancy op amps and these great big heavy duty transistors, which are super cool. So these things should be really durable. So the next step on this thing is, I don't know if Zapco's cool with this, but I'm going to stick this thing in my truck and we're going to do a sound demo in vehicle, because I listen to that vehicle all the time, and I've tested it with great amps and great stuff. So why putting it on the bench really doesn't do a whole lot for me to give an opinion on it. 6 hours later, got the Zapco in and all tuned in, and I've been listening to this thing for about a week. What do you guys think? I think that reference series amp sounded amazing. You know, I've heard these home audio guys, you know, they try to describe the sound, but I'm not going to get into that. Like I said, in my vehicle, I've listened to some really, really high end, old school, clean, really nice amps, and I don't know if it's just that as the amps age, they kind of roll off a bit on the higher frequencies, or if it's just the newer op amps and the better capacitors and things in these new amps. But that reference series amp really was crisp and very bright on the top end. So I retuned it and dialed it into my liking, and I will say that the channel separation was just amazing, and it just kind of had that nice sparkle. Where in a previous video I played this thing in there, and on it was completely polar opposites. Like this was a downgrade really from anything that I played. I'm not trying to bag on the Fosse audio amp. What I'm trying to point out is that sometimes those THD numbers and distortion numbers really don't tell the whole story of an amplifier. And that reference was just amazing on the higher frequencies. Obviously it was adequate power. It worked quite well. Similar to other stuff that I've had in my system, but I think where it really shines, and I think that's where the capacitor technology and possibly the op amps and stuff really come into play with this new AB, because when it plays those really high frequencies, they're crystal clear. Because what happens is, and I'm talking at above the 80 dB, SQ level. I mean, I'm talking, let's pump up the jam, I mean, that my system's, 130, 35 dB, no problem. Close to 100, 40 at some point. But at the high level volume levels, this thing still just really cool. So anyways, so it does look like, I learned something from this video as well. Is Zapco is moving to the future. They are updating their lines. They've got a lot of other stuff in their lineup. So if you go over to Zapco's website, you can see that they have amplifiers in almost every price point. They've got amplifiers with built-in DSPs, ABD, compact, all different sorts. It's not all about their high-end stuff. If you're interested in checking some of that stuff out, let me know. And again, I think as far as on the U.S. level, Zapco is really there and doing a good job, with customer service and moving the brand forward. So, anyways, I look forward to checking out some more stuff and maybe picking up some vintage Zapco stuff. I've got the Zapco bug here. So, anyways, I appreciate you guys watching. In the comments, let me know what you guys think. I appreciate you sticking around to the end to hear this ramble. I know this video ended up being a lot longer than I expected it to. Ended up being a lot more than I expected it to. This is probably one of the videos I have more time into, other than maybe like one of my shootout videos. But anyways, I think we learned a lot. Zapco is not a Class B amp. I think they're well built. Maybe they need to talk to their QC department, or maybe look into why did those amps have swapped out parts and things and stuff like that. So that's kind of odd, but anyways, thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.